Chapter 2120. Crazy energy swept in all directions, and several deep trenches spread on the ground. However, the black jade square remained the same, without a single trace left behind. Chu Liyue's eyes darkened. She had used all her strength in that attack, and she could even fight against a god. However, the black jade square's defensive power was extraordinary, and it easily resisted the attack. If he wanted to rely on his own strength to break through it, it was obviously impossible. No one knew better than her how strong and sturdy the armillary shield was. If it really came from the black jade square, then things would be a lot more troublesome. At this moment, Shiru suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and her face was extremely pale. It seemed that she was in the same situation as Yao Lin. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Even if she could help, it was unrealistic for so many people to do it one by one. Moreover, she'd come here this time to look for Tuan Zi and Zichen. Now, they hadn't even entered the main door of the palace, and they were already in trouble. It was even harder to predict what would happen later. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat, and she walked to the side. Come here. Shiru wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. When she heard this, she immediately followed her without hesitation. What's wrong? Chu Liyue stretched out her hand, and a small shuttle-shaped seed with 2 green tender leaves lay quietly in her palm. Shiru was stunned. What's this? Chu Liyue raised her chin. Touch its leaves. Shiru didn't understand, but she still did as she was told. She stretched out her hand and carefully touched the tender green leaves. Her fingertips were still stained with blood, leaving a faint trace on it. However, as soon as Shiru withdrew her hand, she saw that the trace of blood quickly disappeared. Immediately after, she felt that there was a subtle connection between her and this little seed. She looked at Chu Liyue in surprise. Chu Liyue stared at her. How do you feel now? These words sounded inexplicable to others, but Shiru knew that some kind of shocking change was happening in her body. The crazy energy that was about to overflow seemed to be guided by some kind of power and rushed toward the seed. Even the pain in his body had been reduced by a lot. She looked at Chu Liyue in disbelief and stuttered. How did you do it? Seeing her reaction, Chu Liyue knew that this method was working. He immediately relaxed and smiled. That's good. The other elders of the meteor sect also followed them one after another as they heard the strange conversation between the two of them. One of them had sharp eyes and saw the thing in Chu Liyue's hand. After a short moment of shock, he said in shock, "Tu Tian baby?" As soon as he spoke, he realized that he had lost his composure and hurriedly covered his mouth. However, the surrounding people still heard it clearly. They all looked over with different reactions. Tu Tian baby? Sheng Guanyu even has this thing? It can't be, right? If it's true, then she has too many treasures in her hands. It has a round belly in the middle and 2 pointy ends. It has a vigorous vitality. It's definitely a Tu Tian baby. However, it seems that it has just sprouted. I have a vague impression of it. It's rumored that she used this treasure when she took over the Peach Blossom Cove. However, there were too many rumors about Chu Liyue. Therefore, no one could tell whether they were true or false. Therefore, even if someone had heard about it, they didn't pay much attention to it. It was only when they saw Chu Liyue take out one that the crowd believed her. In the past, Chu Liyue had always been careful to hide the existence of the Tu Tian baby. After all, she was worried that it would bring her trouble. However, she didn't have this concern now. Moreover, the Tu Tian baby seemed to be very useful at this time. The elders looked at Shiru. Second young mistress, just now you. Shiru's eyes lit up. This Tu Tian baby sucked out all the excess energy in my body. As soon as she finished speaking, the noisy crowd suddenly quieted down. The elders looked at each other. After a while, one of them asked with uncertainty. Second young mistress, you mean? Shiru waved her hand. Oh, I can't explain it clearly. Yue, why don't you explain it to them? Chu Liyue nodded. The Tu Tian baby can absorb the energy of heaven and earth. When Re'er's blood merged with the Tu Tian baby, it was equivalent to connecting with the Tu Tian baby. The energy that flowed into her body could be transferred to the Tu Tian baby. In this way, she could avoid the same situation as Yao Lin. Her tone was light, but every word was no different from a sudden clap of thunder in the ears of the crowd. Almost everyone was facing this kind of danger now. If they could really rely on the two Tian baby to solve this problem, it was equivalent to giving everyone a way out. Yu Zhu, is what you said true? The elder who spoke was still in disbelief and asked carefully. Shi Ru was displeased. Elder, do you not trust her, or do you not trust me? I've already tested it myself just now. There's absolutely no problem. The elder hurriedly coaxed. Second young mistress, please don't misunderstand. We were too shocked, so we asked this question. We trust Yu Zhu's character and ability the most. Shi Ruer's expression became better. Yuer is helping us. We can't even thank her enough. If you don't believe me, you can come and try it yourself. Seeing her solemn vow, the elder immediately calmed down and cupped his hands at Chu Liyue. Yu Zhu, I wonder if we can. You are all venerables, so I think the current situation should be fine. However, if you want to test it out, you can. As Chu Liyue spoke, she handed the two Tian baby over. That elder solemnly expressed his thanks again. Only then did he bite his finger and lightly touch the soft green leaves. Just like before, the blood was quickly swallowed up. Almost at the same time, the elder's expression changed to one of surprise and joy. Yu Zhu, you're really amazing. Many people secretly exchanged glances. It seemed that this was true. Chu Liyue smiled faintly. She didn't take these suspicions to heart. If it were her, she would also need to verify it before she would believe it. She looked at Yao Bin. Princess Yao, if you trust me, Yao Bin immediately said. Yu Zhu, what are you saying? We can't thank you enough for saving us just now. Of course, we trust you the most. As he spoke, he helped Yao Lin to his feet and walked over to Chu Liyue. Without hesitation, he left Yao Lin's blood on the leaf. Seeing this, many people became restless. However, at this moment, a strange voice suddenly sounded. Everyone, please think carefully. Shengguan Yu is the owner of the two Tian baby. If you associate yourself with the two Tian baby, it's equivalent to putting your lives in her hands. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 21-21. These words were like a bucket of cold water that poured over everyone's hearts. Many people immediately calmed down. That's right. According to Shi Ru, the extra energy in her body had been channeled into the two Tian baby. But who could guarantee what Chu Liyue would do in the future? What if she wanted more? What if she used the two Tian baby to forcefully take away everyone's energy? At that time, it would be difficult to solve this problem. Chu Liyue raised her eyes slightly and looked in the direction of the voice. The person who spoke was a girl in her early 20s. She was wearing a sky blue dress. She had a pretty face and a tall figure. Unfortunately, her expression was fierce. When she looked at Chu Liyue, there was a hint of resentment, which made her look somewhat sinister. Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes slightly. She didn't know this girl. She had never even seen her before. Shi Ru stepped forward and said coldly, Niyun, what nonsense are you spouting? Hearing this name, Chu Liyue immediately understood. I was wondering who it was. So it's the eldest daughter of the Celestial Sect. The Celestial Sect was also a first-rate family in the Divine Ruins world. Nieruyun was the only pearl in the palm of the Celestial Sect's sect leader, Nye Hongjie. Ruyun, don't be impudent. A middle-aged man standing next to her said in a low voice. Chu Liyue glanced at him. This person was probably Nye Hongjie. However, although these words sounded like a reprimand, Nye Hongjie's eyes didn't have any real intention of reprimanding her. Nieruyun was still as arrogant as before. She sneered, I'm spouting nonsense? Are you saying that I'm not speaking the truth? Although I don't have the two Tian baby, I know that it's extremely domineering. You guys trust her so easily and put all your wealth in her hands. In the future, you won't even know how you died. I'm not that stupid. The surrounding people were even more shaken. Most of them did not have any relationship with Chu Liyue. If they were related to the two Tian baby like Shi Ru and the others, they would be safe for the time being. But what about after that? With the two Tian baby in Chu Liyue's hands, Wouldn't he be able to do whatever he wanted? The atmosphere suddenly became very subtle. Chu Luiyue stroked his chin. She didn't seem to have interacted with anyone from the celestial sect before, but looking at Nyeryun's expression, it seemed as if she had a deep grudge against her. When did she offend her? As if sensing her doubts, Shirer whispered, She and Wei Shiping are childhood sweethearts and their feelings for each other are very deep. Before Wei Shiping was chased out of the Wei family, the two of them were already engaged. Chu Luiyue immediately understood. So that was the case. Was Nyeryun pushing all the blame onto her? Nyeryun was indeed filled with hatred towards Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu. Originally, she and Wei Shiping were on good terms. They even discussed that after Wei Shiping graduated from Lingshao College and returned to the family Wei, they would officially get married. Who knew that so many things would happen after that? Wei Shiping's whereabouts were unknown, and their engagement was cancelled. How could she be willing to see the two culprits, Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu, again? Previously, due to various reasons, she didn't dare to make a scene. Now that the opportunity was here, she definitely wouldn't let it go. Chu Luiyue wasn't angry. She smiled and said politely, "Lady Nia, I think you're overthinking. I don't intend to help you, so your worries are unnecessary." Pfft. Shirer was originally very angry, but when she heard this, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. "That's right. Nyeryun, it's not your turn yet. What right do you have to speak? Aren't you thinking too highly of yourself?" Nyeryun's face instantly flushed red and white. I'm just reminding everyone not to fall for your trick. Who knows if you're thinking of using this opportunity to do something? Chu Luiyue picked up the heaven-wrecking holy seed, gently turned the two small leaves, and nonchalantly said, "Lady Nia, to be honest, when Nan Yifan died, I didn't even put in so much effort. How capable are you that you're worth my time?" When she said this, there was a faint smile on her lips, but this smile didn't reach her eyes. The frosty look in her eyes made people feel fearful. Nyeryun choked, and the expressions of many people around them changed. In the Divine Ruins world, the Nan family and the Yi family were even stronger than these so-called first-rate families and clans. Yi Wentao had been defeated by her, and Nan Yifan had died in Peach Blossom Cove. The Nan family was in shambles and had suffered heavy casualties. If she really wanted to make a move on everyone present, she had the time and strength. Why did she have to make a move at this time? Nyeryun's guess seemed to make some sense, but when she thought about it carefully, it actually didn't hold water. Nye Hongjie stood up and cupped his hands. "Master Yu, please don't take it to heart. Ruyun is still young and immature. It's inevitable that she would say the wrong thing under impulse." Sect Master Nye. Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. "If I remember correctly, Nye Ruyun is already 23 years old. She's a few years older than our youth. She doesn't have a brain, so there's no need to talk about age." This time, Nye Hongjie's expression turned ugly. Rong Xiu looked around. "You, has always been kind and helpful. I don't have that much patience. If you want to live, do as you see fit. If you want to die, I won't stop you. After all, the energy here is abundant. Tu Tian baby doesn't lack that bit of fertilizer." His words made everyone speechless, and their expressions changed. It was very interesting. Chu Luiyue silently gave him a thumbs up in her heart. Her man was usually too lazy to speak, but when he did, it was so direct that it pierced people's hearts. Nyeryun turned and left angrily. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 21-22. Nye Hongjie frowned and said, "Goodbye." Then he turned and chased after them. The celestial sect left quickly. Chu Luiyue looked at their backs and narrowed her eyes. Shirer thought that her anger had not subsided. "It's not worth getting angry over these people." Chu Luiyue shook her head. "I'm not angry. I'm just thinking. They seem to be very confident and are not worried about meeting the same situation as Yao Lin and the rest." She recalled that the celestial sect members, including Nyeryun, did not seem to show any signs of discomfort from the beginning to the end. This was obviously not right. Among those present, the eminent god was still fine. Almost all of the high gods had fallen and could not take it anymore. But they were fine. If they were worried about this problem, They would not even have time to hug Chu Liyue's thighs. Why would they offend her? No matter how stupid Nyeruyun was, she would not care about such things at a time of life and death. Shiru thought for a while and suddenly said, "Oh, right. I remember that one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, the snow-blowing goblet, is with them. That item is similar to the 2 baby and can store a lot of heaven and earth energy. It was said that when Nye Hongjie was not strong enough, he would take out the snow-blowing goblet and rely on the astonishing power stored inside to crush his opponent. He won every battle." Chu Liyue raised her eyebrows. "I was wondering." Nyeruyun was fine, but Nye Hongjie's attitude was also very presumptuous. With such a trump card, it was no wonder that they were so bold. Yaobin took a step forward and said seriously, "Purple Light County is willing to stand by Lord Yu's side." This was a public declaration of his intention to stand on Chu Liyue's side. After all, if not for Chu Liyue, Yao Lin would have died and their situation would not be any better. Yaobin was very grateful to Chu Liyue, so he took the initiative to stand up without hesitation. Chu Liyue smiled. Although she didn't care about everyone's attitude, Yao Binkin's actions still made her feel a lot better. Then, Yaobin cut his finger and connected himself to the heaven-wrecking holy seed. Everyone else from Purple Light County did the same. After the Meteor Sect and the Purple Light County left, some other people came over to ask for help. Only a few people chose to follow the Heavenly Martial Sect. Chu Liyue didn't mind. The reason why she was willing to help was because it was indeed a piece of cake for her. Moreover, it could also help the 2 baby grow up. Nyeruyun was right about one thing. When these people accepted Chu Liyue's help, it was equivalent to entrusting half of their lives to Chu Liyue. She had taken the initiative, so there was nothing to worry about. Chu Liyue looked at the 2 baby in her hand. At this moment, other than her, there were already 31 people connected to it. She could clearly feel the subtle connections, and she could also feel the abundant energy flowing into it. The leaves of the 2 baby swayed gently, and it became even more verdant. Chu Liyue took a few glances at it and put it away. Bang! At this moment, the door of the palace suddenly opened. Chu Liyue turned around abruptly. Everyone present looked over at the same time, and they were all shocked. No one expected the door to open at this moment. They didn't do anything. Chu Liyue looked over, and her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't see anything behind the door, except for a thick black color. Then, the eye suddenly appeared. Chu Liyue's expression became serious, and she rushed over without hesitation. The suffocating darkness and silence shrouded Dumpling. She lay on the ground, curling up in pain. Intense pain came from all over her body, causing her to tremble slightly. Every inch of her muscles, bones, blood, and flesh seemed to be dismembered. It was as if countless sharp knives were madly cutting her body. Even when she was going through the tribulation, she had never suffered such torture. However, the energy continued to flow into her body. From the initial desperate struggle to the current haggard state, Dumpling didn't know how much time had passed. Her mind was also gradually becoming dizzy. If not for the constant stimulation of the pain all over her body, she would have fainted long ago. "You," she murmured in a low voice, and her breath was weak, filled with endless longing and desire. Suddenly, a violent crash came from the wall behind her. Bang! Crack! On the wall, a long crack suddenly appeared. Hearing the sound, Dumpling struggled to look up, but she didn't even have the strength to lift her fingers. The eye that was originally staring at Dumpling heard the noise, and a trace of anger and bloodlust flashed past. "How dare you!" Then, a black chain quickly flew out and directly penetrated the wall. Boom! A hole appeared in the wall. A shadow, tightly bound by the chain, was dragged in. It was Zichen. His body was stained with blood, as if he had just been through a fierce battle. In particular, there were 2 bloody holes on his wrists, and blood was gushing out. He had paid a terrible price to escape. At this moment, his ankles were once again bound by the chain, and he was dragged in the direction of the eye. When he passed by Dumpling, he gritted his teeth and pulled Dumpling into his arms with one hand and grabbed the chain beside Dumpling with the other hand. The other part of the chain was still on the wall that hadn't collapsed. Zichen's pull immediately tightened the chain. Dumpling opened her eyes in a daze and saw a familiar cold and handsome face. Crush! Another chain flew out and pierced Zichen's shoulder, nailing him to the ground. A trail of warm blood splashed onto Dumpling's face. The scene in front of her was instantly covered with a layer of scarlet. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 21-23. The thick stench of blood filled her nostrils. It was almost nauseating. The rapidly spreading blood color in front of her eyes provoked Tuanzi's last nerve, which was called rationality. Zichen. She wanted to support Zichen, but she could only feel something sticky on her hand. She looked down and saw that his left shoulder had been pierced and was badly mutilated. Because he was wearing black clothes, the blood had seeped into his clothes and soaked a large area. Dumpling's hand trembled slightly. "You overestimate yourself." The voice came from behind her, carrying undisguised contempt and disdain. "Do you think that you're so great just because you have a great phoenix dragon wing bone?" Even Dumpling, who had the purest bloodline, could not fight back. What could a legendary three-eyed eagle do? Zichen gritted his teeth and quickly glanced in that direction. After following Dumpling down, he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was already trapped in an incomparably dark cage. His wrists were also shackled by 2 chains. However, he quickly realized that Dumpling seemed to be only a wall away from him. She broke free from the chains without hesitation and even paid a terrible price for it. Now that he looked at it, there was indeed something wrong with that eye. Zichen took a deep breath and switched Dumpling to his right hand. Only then did he see the wound on Dumpling's arm. He frowned. Dumpling's aura was very unusual. This was very similar to when she was about to open her meridians. When he thought of this, Zichen was suddenly shocked. Dumpling had just opened her 5th meridian not long ago. Logically speaking, it was impossible for her to continue opening her meridians in such a short time. When he saw the surging aura around her, as if it would explode at any time, he felt even more uneasy. If Dumpling forcefully opened her meridians now, it would only be harmful. He had to leave this place as soon as possible. When Zichen thought of this, he suddenly grabbed the chain that nailed him to the ground. Because he used so much force, his knuckles were faintly blue. When Dumpling saw this, her heart skipped a beat. She immediately pressed his hand down. Zichen. Zichen pulled the chain out by force. Bright red flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The next moment, he hugged Dumpling tightly, got up, and planned to run away. A blood-colored Xian formation suddenly appeared above their heads. A terrifying pressure descended, immediately trapping them in place, unable to break free. Zichen spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to his knees. One of his hands was on the ground, while the other hand was carefully protecting Dumpling in his arms. Tuanzi's eyes were abruptly burning with golden flames. She looked at the blood-colored profound formation above her head and gradually clenched her fists. In the past, she had always wanted to be Zichen's big sister. However, she had never expected that he would be the one to protect her at such a critical moment. The blood in Dumpling's body surged as if it was about to burst out at any moment. She retracted her gaze and looked at the eye. "You can't touch my people." A totem flashed between her eyebrows. On the other side, Chu Luiwei had already rushed into the main hall as fast as she could. The moment she stepped into the main hall, an extremely bright and dazzling light suddenly poured down from above. The strong light stung her eyes, and she subconsciously turned her face to the side. After a moment, she raised her eyes again and looked forward. When she saw the scene in the main hall clearly, she was instantly stunned. This was an extremely tall circular palace with a dome above. The light shone down from above. The surrounding walls were interlaced with black and white jade, and ancient and mysterious relief sculptures were carved on them. On the jade disc, there were holes of various sizes that had been hollowed out. In each hole, there was a ball of light quietly suspended. The colors were different and extremely gorgeous. There was a faint divine pressure, and there was a boundless and ancient aura everywhere, as if no one had set foot in this place for thousands of years. Chu Luiwei stood at the entrance and slowly glanced at the balls of light. The eye was nowhere to be seen. She lifted her feet and walked into the main hall. The people behind her also followed in one after another. Chu Luiyue looked around and searched again. The cold and gloomy aura seemed to have never appeared. However, she was sure that she had not seen wrongly. The eye was indeed hidden here. A venerable one divine artifact. A voice filled with surprise suddenly sounded. This voice immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the main hall. Chu Luiyue also looked over. Nie Hongjie had also followed in at some point. At this moment, he was standing in front of the jade wall with a longbow in his hand. In the hole beside his hand, the originally flickering ball of light had disappeared. Obviously, this bow was the one he had taken out from there. He was extremely excited, and the wrinkles on his face seemed to have smoothed out a lot. Just now, he only felt that the aura of the ball of light was rather unusual. He was curious and wanted to try and see if he could take it out. In the end, just as his finger touched the ball of light, it fell into his hand. The entire process was extremely smooth. What he did not expect was that it was a venerable one divine artifact. He had really picked up a treasure. When everyone saw this, they looked at each other with unconcealable shock in their eyes. What kind of place was this? How could one get a venerable one divine artifact so easily? Nie Ruyun reacted quickly. When he saw this, he immediately thought of something. He also came in front of the jade wall, casually chose a ball of light, and took out the item inside. It was a small green jade bottle. Seeing that it was not a venerable one divine artifact, Nie Ruyun was a little disappointed. He casually pulled out the jade bottle stopper. What is this? A strong medicinal fragrance filled the air. Nie Hongjie immediately exclaimed, "Dragon recovery pill?" This was a medicinal pill of the Grand Physician level. He was a Grand Physician himself, so he naturally knew how precious this dragon recovery pill was. When Nie Ruyun heard this, the regret and disappointment from before were swept away. He asked excitedly, "Father, is this really a dragon recovery pill?" Nie Hongjie walked over, took a closer look, and laughed. "Of course it's real. When have I ever lied to you? Ruyun, you're really amazing. You just casually picked it up, and you actually got a medicinal pill of this level." Nie Ruyun was very proud. He carefully put away the bottle of dragon recovery pills. Father is still the best. After all, he had a genuine venerable one divine artifact in his hands. More importantly, if it weren't for him, they wouldn't have thought that these balls of light actually hid such a treasure. Seeing that the father and daughter had easily put away two rare treasures, the crowd immediately became restless. Many people walked to the jade wall and took out the balls of light from the cave. Sure enough, there were divine artifacts, pills, magic arts, and extremely high-level Xian formation diagrams. All kinds of treasures were endless. Moreover, what was even more shocking was that the treasures that Nie Hongjie and his daughter had obtained before were actually ordinary here. Seeing that more and more people had obtained the treasures, Chu Luiyue gradually frowned. What is this place? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 21-24. In the past few years, she had been to many places. However, whether it was Lingxiao College, which was known as the #1 college in the world of divine ruins, or the Yuntian Tower, which had a profound heritage of thousands of years, compared to this place, they were much inferior. No, it should be said that they could not be compared at all. From the moment they entered until now, in a short period of time, there were already 9 people who had obtained the venerable artifact. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. Looking up, on the 4 jade walls, there were hundreds and thousands of holes. It was almost impossible to count. And almost every one of these light balls was a treasure that was rarely seen in the world. This place was a real treasure trove. Even the once high and mighty family Yi and Nan family combined could not compare to 1/10 of this place. What kind of existence in the world of divine ruins could have such shocking wealth? One had to know that the things here could no longer be measured by money. There were so many venerable artifacts, so many top-notch pills, so many powerful cultivation techniques. If it was not for the strong luck and power, it was absolutely impossible to have these things. However, after thinking about it, She did not expect that there had been such a heaven-defying existence in the world of divine ruins. I also got a venerable artifact. Suddenly, Shiru, who was standing not far from her, exclaimed in surprise. Chu Luiwei glanced at her. She was holding a folding fan in her hand. The handle of the folding fan was carved from blue jade, but the surface of the fan was woven from golden cloud silk. It was indeed a top-notch treasure. Shiru said to Chu Luiwei, "Yue, what are you doing? There are so many treasures around, don't you like any of them?" Although she already had many trump cards in this world, who would complain about having too many good things? Chu Luiwei smiled. "That's not it, Yue, there's something wrong with her folding fan." Su Li's voice suddenly entered her ears. Chu Luiwei was stunned and asked in her heart, "Mr. Su? What's wrong?" Su Li said, "Show me the folding fan." Although Chu Luiwei didn't know her intentions, hearing her solemn tone, he didn't dare to neglect. She looked at Shiru. Can you let me have a closer look at this folding fan?" "Ah, okay." Shiru didn't suspect anything and handed over the folding fan. Chu Luiwei held the folding fan in his hand. It was cold and smooth to the touch, and it carried a faint pressure. It seemed to be no different from an ordinary venerable artifact. Then, she injected a strand of her force, only to find that her power was completely blocked outside. This folding fan had an owner. Sensing her thoughts, Su Li continued speaking. "Not only that, the divine artifacts here all have the same aura. I'm afraid they all have the same master." Chu Yue's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly raised her head and looked up. Countless balls of light were floating quietly in the air, flashing brilliantly. She couldn't help but mutter, "Then, those pills and incantations, I can't sense those, but if these divine artifacts really belong to the same person, then the other objects placed together are very likely to belong to the same person." Chu Luiwei sucked in a breath of cold air. In fact, things like pills and incantations were easy to deal with. The key was that divine artifacts needed to recognize their owners. If a cultivator could own a venerable artifact, it was undoubtedly something to be proud of. If he could own several of them, it would be even more amazing and rare. But she had never heard of anyone who could own hundreds or thousands of divine artifacts at the same time. What kind of person was this? Would such a person tolerate others taking his things? Chu Luiwei looked up slightly and looked at the people in the hall. At this time, almost everyone had a divine artifact in their hands. Some had one divine artifact, while others had several. And they didn't look like they were going to stop. Obviously, this place had become an open treasury in their eyes, and they could take whatever they wanted. Chu Luiwei suddenly broke out in cold sweat. What are you thinking about?" Shiru saw that Chu Luiwei's expression was a little strange, so she couldn't help but wave her hand in front of her eyes. Chu Luiwei came back to her senses and immediately put the folding fan in her hand back to its original position. After that, the folding fan was quickly covered by a ball of light and returned to its original appearance. Shiru was dumbfounded. "What are you? Everything here has an owner. You can't take it," Chu Luiwei said concisely. Shiru was stunned. "They have an owner? What do you mean they have an owner? Shangguanyu, you're talking nonsense again." Nieruyun had just taken a short sword. Hearing this, she turned around and sneered, waving the short sword in her hand. "This venerable artifact just recognized me as its owner. If it already has an owner, why would it still recognize me?" Chu Luiwei ignored her and looked at Yao Bin and the others. "You can't take these things." Yao Bin was holding a Xian formation diagram in his hand. Hearing this, he was a little surprised, but he still put it back. He also instructed the others in Purple Light County to put the things back. But of course, there were people who were reluctant to part with such good things. A young man hesitated and asked, "Princess, this divine artifact has just recognized me as its owner. Should I put it back too?" With their status, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to obtain a venerable artifact. Now that they finally encountered it, how could they let it go? Yao Bin said in a low voice, "Do as Master Yu says." Although he also felt that this matter was a little strange, he trusted Chu Luiwei very much. Chu Luiwei had Peach Blossom Dock and several strong backers. There was no reason for her to waste time and energy on this matter. Since she said so, she must have her reasons. Hearing this, the young man was very reluctant, but he didn't dare to go against Yao Bin's words. He could only put the things back slowly. Seeing this, Shiru also looked at the elders of the meteor sect behind her. Let's not take it for now. The few elders were very obedient and did as she said without a second word. But their actions were obviously stupid in the eyes of Nyeryun and the others. She sneered. Some people just can't bear to see others better than her. She's so timid. I really don't know if the rumors about Chu Luiwei are true or false. Ruyun, this bottle of Breaking Yuan Crow Gold Pills can help you cultivate and become a supreme god sooner. Take it. Nye Hongjie said and handed over a jade box. Nyeryun was very happy. Thank you, father. She freed one of her hands to take it. But at this moment, the jade box suddenly exploded. It turned into a ball of black fog and tightly wrapped around Nyeryun's hand. An intense pain that caught him off guard swept over him in an instant. Nyeryun immediately let out an extremely mournful scream. My hand. Wonderful book house. Chapter 21-25. Nye Hongjie was also anxious. He immediately stepped forward and pulled Nyeryun's arm back, trying to take her away from the black fog. However, the black fog stuck to her hand, and she couldn't get rid of it. Drip. A drop of blood dripped down. Nyeryun looked at her hand. Through the black fog, she could vaguely see that her hand had been severely corroded. It was badly mangled, and even her white bones could be seen. Her face turned pale in an instant. Father! Father! Save me! Save me! She screamed in terror and fell to the ground in an instant. Clang! The short sword and the jade bottle of returning dragon pills also fell to the ground. Nye Hongjie supported her with difficulty, not knowing what to do. The black fog was illusory, but it was extremely difficult to deal with like maggots on the bones. An orange flame appeared in his palm, and he planned to burn it up. However, when the flame touched the black fog, it didn't burn it out. Instead, it was swallowed by it. With the help of the flame, the black fog quickly spread. Nye Hongjie was shocked. When he was about to take action, an explosion came from his body. It was the longbow that he had just put away. A cloud of black fog spread out from his interspatial ring and quickly wrapped around his palm and forearm. Nye Hongjie was shocked. However, before he could react, the two items that had fallen from Nyeryun's hand also exploded. Bang, 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 bang. They were all the items that had been taken out of the cave. Clumps of black fog spread out. Many people were injured, and there was a lot of blood on the ground. Everyone finally panicked. Shiru opened her eyes wide. How could this be? It was hard to imagine that Nyeryun was rolling on the ground in pain. A few minutes ago, she was proudly showing off that she had gotten a divine artifact. At that moment, her hand had practically become a skeleton. It was a ghastly sight. Shiru subconsciously touched her hand, feeling a lingering fear. If it weren't for Chu Luiwei's reminder, she would probably have. The young man standing beside Yao Bin was stunned too. He opened his mouth, but could not find any words to say. Yao Bin turned around and gave him a meaningful look. Everyone wants treasures, but you have to be alive first. The young man's face alternated between red and white. Finally, he turned to Chu Luiwei and said, Thank you, Master Yu. Chu Luiwei shook his head, indicating that he didn't care. His gaze was still fixed on the exploding black fog. Mr. Su, these things aren't real, right? Su Li was silent for a moment before she said, Yes. I just realized it too. Everything here is too real. If it wasn't for that thing suddenly exploding, I would have been deceived as well. Chu Luiwei pursed his lips tightly. Su Li and Tang Ku were definitely the best blacksmiths in the world. But just now, she had only recognized that these divine artifacts had owners. She didn't realize that they were all fake. Was everything in front of her an illusion? Suddenly, a familiar wave came from her dantian. Chu Luiwei was shocked. Sus, dumplings aura. Almost at the same time, Yi Zhao also looked over. The two of them looked at each other and immediately confirmed each other's thoughts. Chu Liuyue's heart started to beat faster. Ever since Dumpling and Zichen went missing, this was the first time she sensed Dumpling's aura. She looked in the direction of the wave and was stunned. It seemed to be coming from under the ground of the main hall. Chu Liyue immediately stepped forward and went to the centermost position. Beneath her feet was a solid and thick floor paved with jade. Dumpling should be under here. But how was she going to go down? Just as she was thinking, Yizhao had already stepped forward. Step back first. Upon hearing this, Chu Liyue hesitated for a moment before she immediately took a few steps back. Yizhao clenched his fist, and a red-gold flame enveloped him and burned fiercely. Then, his fist landed heavily with wind and thunder. Boom! The ground shook violently. A crack spread rapidly. Immediately after, a cold aura rushed out from below. Just as Chu Liyue was about to step forward, Xin Yi suddenly stepped forward and said, "Master, we don't know what's going on down there. I'll go down and investigate first." Chu Liyue shook her head. "Dumpling is very likely down there. I have to go personally." Time was of the essence. She couldn't delay any longer. Xin Yi frowned slightly, but still chose to step aside and follow closely behind Chu Liyue. The crack gradually expanded. But at this moment, Chu Liyue suddenly realized that something seemed to be emerging from the ground. She focused her eyes and looked over. Only now did she notice that the black mist had actually suddenly suffused the ground, and there was some sort of strange striations that were slowly appearing beneath it. Chu Liyue vaguely found it familiar. She turned back to look at Rong Xiu. "Rong Xiu, don't you think?" Her voice came to an abrupt halt. Rong Xiu didn't follow her. At this moment, he was standing beside the jade wall with one hand on the wall and his head slightly lowered. Sensing that something wasn't right with his condition, Chu Liyue immediately went over. "Rong Xiu, what's the matter with you?" As she spoke, she held Rong Xiu's arm and pulled his hand. It was cold to the touch. She looked down in shock and saw that Rong Xiu's slender hand was covered in a thin layer of frost. Digression, 6 o'clocks. Chapter 21-26. A golden flame surged out and enveloped the thin layer of ice, melting it in an instant. Rong Xiu's tightly shut eyes slowly opened. "I'm fine." His voice was low and hoarse. How could he be fine? Chu Liyue held his hand tightly, walked to him, and looked up at him. "Rong Xiu, what happened to you?" She was so focused on the strange light and black fog that she did not notice Rong Xiu's situation. She did not know why he suddenly became like this. He looked a little tired, and his brows were slightly furrowed. But he had been with her all this time, and nothing seemed to have happened in between. Rong Xiu shook his head and held her hand tightly. He took a step forward and kissed her gently between her brows. "Nothing, I just feel a little uncomfortable here." "Are you not comfortable here?" Chu Liyue's heart sank. This hall was indeed very strange. Could it be that Rong Xiu was also because of... Boom! A loud sound was heard, and Chu Liyue looked back. A reddish-gold flame suddenly spewed out from the crack in the middle. It was Dumpling's flame. Chu Liyue was about to step forward when she suddenly saw that the flame seemed to be attracted by some kind of force, and flowed in all directions. Not long after, the brilliant and scorching flames spread along the lines that had gradually appeared under the black fog, forming a huge and strange pattern on the ground. But because of the black fog, Chu Liyue could not see the pattern clearly. She could only vaguely see the light and shadow. But for some reason, she felt that she had seen this pattern somewhere before. Before she could figure it out, a small figure suddenly rushed out from below. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. Dumpling! But in the next moment, she noticed that Dumpling's current state was extremely strange. Dumpling was suspended in midair, and her body was stained with blood. Especially her wrists, which were bound by 2 black chains. Her body was burning with golden flames, and her aura was shocking. Everyone present was shocked by this scene. After a short moment of stupefaction, someone immediately shouted, "This is the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix contracted by Shangguanyu." In the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, only Dumpling had transformed into a human form at an extremely young age, So when she appeared at this time, everyone immediately recognized her identity. Many people looked at Chu Luiwei in shock and confusion. How could her contracted magical beast fly out from the ground? At this moment, Yi Zhao was the closest to Dumpling. The moment he saw Tuanzi covered in blood, he felt a flame burning in his chest and abdomen. Dumpling! With a deep shout, he tipped his toes and headed straight for Dumpling. Dumpling had her back to him. However, upon hearing his voice, Dumpling remained motionless and lowered her head slightly. Yi Zhao felt that something was wrong. When Dumpling came out just now, Chu Luiwei also called out Dumpling's name, but she did not respond. If it was in the past, she would have been very happy to respond. Even if her hands were tied up, she should have responded. Dumpling, why are you? As Yi Zhao spoke, his hand had already touched Dumpling's shoulder. Right at this moment, Dumpling, who had been standing still, suddenly moved. She raised her wrist, and the black chain on her wrist was suddenly thrown at Yi Zhao. Yi Zhao was shocked and immediately raised his hand to block it. The chain heavily whipped his forearm, and a bloody wound immediately appeared. Yi Zhao quickly retreated and looked at Dumpling with a frown. This aura was much stronger than the last time he saw Dumpling. If it was in the past, he would definitely be happy to see Dumpling's strength improve. However, Dumpling's aura had increased in an extremely strange manner. Moreover, her condition seemed to be. Seeing this scene, Chu Luiwei suddenly held his breath. How long had it been? Dumpling's strength had increased so much that she could even leave such a wound on Yi Zhao's body. Yi Zhao was the most powerful person in the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. The strength of his physical body was rarely seen in this world. What exactly had Dumpling experienced during this period of time? At this moment, Dumpling finally turned around slowly and raised her head. Her cute little face was now covered in messy bloodstains. Even her eyes seemed to have been dyed red by blood, turning into a scarlet color. Cold, indifferent, and with a trace of indistinct madness. A trace of pain flashed across Yi Zhao's eyes. This was definitely not Dumpling. Dumpling! Wake up! Yi Zhao shouted anxiously. It's Grandpa Clan leader. Take a good look. However, Dumpling's eyes were still frozen. Yi Zhao looked at Dumpling in such a state and felt extremely pained. He lifted his leg and was about to continue forward. Swoosh. Before he could move, Dumpling suddenly raised her hand. The chains shook. All of a sudden, the surrounding black fog began to surge toward the chains. My force. In the dead silence, Nyeryun's voice sounded especially mournful and ear-piercing. Chu Luiwei quickly glanced at her and realized that the ball of black fog had finally separated from her hand. However, it contained an extremely shocking power. That was clearly the power that had been forcibly taken from Nyeryun's body. The ball of black fog drifted to the chains and was quickly absorbed. The power that had been swallowed by the black fog also followed the chains and spread toward Dumpling's body. Nyeryun looked at this scene in horror. She felt waves of weakness coming from her body and was about to go crazy. All the power that she had accumulated in her body had been taken away by the black fog. When she saw that the power had finally gathered in Dumpling's body, she was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she realized something and looked up at Chu Luiwei. Shangguanyu, this was all your plan, wasn't it? Not only did you want to kill me, you also wanted to kill all of us. You are so vicious. She screamed hysterically. Her sharp and piercing voice echoed throughout the hall. Chu Luiwei frowned. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Nyeryun spat out a mouthful of blood. However, her eyes were still filled with hatred as she looked at her and sneered. You don't understand? What are you pretending for? Who doesn't know that this crimson gold heavenly phoenix is your contracted magical beast? Do you dare to say that you didn't secretly instruct her to do what she is doing now? Didn't you already have a plan? I have suspected you for a long time. From the beginning until now, you have been different from others in every way. Now, the evidence is irrefutable. You just want to use us to help your contracted magical beast increase her strength. All of this is a scheme that you set up in advance, right? Nyeryun's words had indeed touched the bottom of many people's hearts. Almost everyone looked over with different expressions in their eyes. This crimson gold heavenly phoenix was indeed swallowing everyone's force and converting it into her own power. As its master, Chu Luiyue really didn't know. Chapter 21-27. Chu Luiyue's expression was cold as she said word by word, "I'll say it again, and for the last time, everything here has nothing to do with me. As for Dumpling, she's obviously being controlled by someone. Can't you see that?" Seeing Dumpling like that already made her extremely uncomfortable. Now that she heard Nuryun's slander, she lost her patience. Dumpling is the young mistress of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, and she has the purest bloodline that only appears once in 1,000 years. Is it worth it for her to use such despicable means to forcefully raise her strength? Nuryun choked for a moment, then clenched her teeth and said, "Only you know this kind of thing the best. Anyway, the truth is right in front of everyone's eyes." Everyone saw it clearly. Nie Hongjie, who was at the side, looked terrible as well. He first fed Nuryun a healing pill before looking at Chu Luiyue and saying in a low voice, "Brother Luiyue, don't worry. Ruyun's words are not without reason. Master you have to give us an explanation for this matter, right?" Thinking about it carefully, many things that happened to her were indeed very strange. For example, the layer of barrier outside the palace. Others would die if they touched it, but she could enter and exit unimpeded. Also, the Black Jade Plaza outside was missing a piece in the middle, which was perfectly compatible with her black shield. Not to mention now, her contracted magical beast suddenly rushed out from below and forcefully took away everyone's force. If it was at the beginning, it could be explained as a coincidence. But now, all kinds of accidents were happening frequently, so it was impossible to explain. Chu Luiyue clenched her fists tightly. Compared to these people's suspicions, she was more worried about Dumpling. At this moment, Dumpling had clearly lost her consciousness. She couldn't even recognize Yi Zhao and herself. The surrounding black fog was still spreading towards the two chains. More and more people were falling into the same situation as Nuryun, and their enmity towards her was clearly getting stronger and stronger. "Master you, why aren't you saying anything? Now that things have come to this, don't you owe us an explanation? What was going on? Do you really want to kill all of us? To think that we trusted you so much before. Who would have thought that you would do such a thing? Could it be that the 2 Tian baby incident was also your doing? Shengguan, you say something." All kinds of questions and denunciations came one after another. From the looks of it, if Chu Luiyue did not give them a satisfactory answer, they would have the urge to attack together. Suddenly, a mocking laugh sounded. Interesting. Everyone was stunned when they realized that the person who spoke was actually Mao Jin. He took a step forward and looked around. His eyes were filled with majesty as he swept his gaze over them one by one. The crowd, who were originally furious, trembled in their hearts and quieted down. Mao Jin had a mocking expression on her face. "From the beginning to the end, you didn't seem to have forced you to follow us, right? Clearly, you were the ones who were greedy. You wanted to obtain the treasures, so you passed through the Gate Realm and came here from the Divine Ruins realm. It was also you who chose to come to this palace of your own accord. Now you're saying that she set you up from the beginning? Why, what happened to your brains?" Mao Jin's words were very blunt and unpleasant to the ears. Many people's faces turned red and their hearts were filled with anger. However, they were intimidated by Mao Jin's aura and did not dare to say anything. They could only suppress their emotions. Mao Jin continued to scoff. "Why do you think Yi Zhao and I came this time? It's because something happened to Dumpling and Ziqin. After we came, we found out that the two of them had gone missing in the Red Moon Desert some time ago. You has been looking for them recently. Anyone with eyes can see that there's something wrong with Dumpling, but you're blaming it on you?" Everyone was speechless. Nie Hongjie's lips moved. In the end, he could not help but defend himself. Even so, how do you explain the series of things that happened to her? She did not look like she had nothing to do with this place. Besides, even if she's really innocent, we're all trapped here now. Doesn't she have to take any responsibility? No matter what, she's her contracted magical beast. Shouldn't she take care of it herself? Nyeruyun gritted his teeth and said hatefully. If she hadn't opened the barrier, all of us wouldn't have been tortured like this. Mao Zhen was so angry that he laughed. After 1,000 years, the human race is still as despicable and lowly as ever. Previously, when they relied on Chu Luiyue to successfully enter the palace, they were not grateful to Chu Luiyue. Now that they were in danger, they all wanted to push the blame to her. The two ancient mythological beast clans had always had a consensus. They would try their best to stay out of the human race's affairs and avoid contact with them as much as possible. Where there were people, there would be disputes. Under the trend of interests, some people could do anything. Looking at it today, it really wasn't the least bit off. He turned to look at Chu Luiyue, but saw that she looked calm and did not seem angry. She stared at Dumpling and said softly, "When I save Dumpling and come back, it won't be too late to tell you all this." With that, she tiptoed and went straight for Dumpling. Yi Zhao frowned and stood in front of her. "It's dangerous." Chu Luiyue smiled and shook her head. "Senior Yi Zhao, if I don't go, no one else in this world can go." Tuanzi was her contracted demon beast, but it was also her friend and family. They had spent countless days and nights together, going through life and death together. In the most difficult times, they had never given up on each other. This time, naturally, they would not give up. Yi Zhao's expression changed and he finally stepped aside. Chu Luiyue stepped forward and reached out to Dumpling. "Dumpling, I'm here to take you home." Buzz. A totem flashed between Dumpling's eyebrows. The energy in the surroundings suddenly went berserk. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Dumpling was about to open her 6th meridian. Chapter 21-28. Chu Luiyue didn't think that this was a good thing. Previously at Peach Blossom Cove, Dumpling had already opened her 5th meridian. It had only been such a short period of time. Not to mention whether Dumpling had enough strength, even her own body wouldn't be able to withstand it. A reddish gold feather appeared in front of Dumpling's forehead. It was the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan's ancestor, Jianghu. Jianghu gently moved, preparing to draw the 6th line between Dumpling's brows. At the same time, more and more black fog fused into the chains, and the power contained within all poured into Dumpling's body. A trace of pain flashed across Dumpling's face. Blood started to gush out from her body. That reddish gold glittering lotus leaf skirt was now stained with blood stains, looking extremely wretched. Seeing Dumpling suffer such torture, Chu Luiyue's heart felt like it was being tightly gripped by something. That pair of grape-like big watery eyes was now left with only a layer of ice and congealed. Clearly, Dumpling could no longer hear or see her. The 6th golden line slowly appeared in front of Dumpling's forehead. Chu Luiyue could clearly sense that Dumpling's aura was strengthening. If it was any other time, she would definitely be overjoyed to see Dumpling's strength increase. However, at this moment, she incomparably hoped that Jianghu would immediately stop. "Dumpling!" Chu Luiyue stepped forward once again. "Be careful, master." Sun Yi and the rest also became nervous. At this moment, Dumpling was in an extremely berserk state. She couldn't recognize Yi Zhao and even attacked him mercilessly. Facing Chu Luiyue, it would probably be the same. Chu Luiyue didn't hesitate and directly grabbed Dumpling's hand. She didn't have any defenses on her body, because any energy fluctuation would cause Dumpling to react violently. Just like that, she completely exposed herself in front of Dumpling. She was at her weakest and softest. The moment her hand touched Dumpling's arm, Dumpling suddenly reacted and raised her wrist. But on the back of Chu Luiyue's hand, a line of blood suddenly appeared. Her forehead twitched and her lips turned pale. However, she continued to stare at Dumpling without any hesitation. His black eyes were as calm as water, but they also contained a certain firmness and gentleness. The color of blood in Dumpling's eyes became even more intense, and the killing intent in her body suddenly exploded. Chu Luiyue gently stroked the wound on her arm and asked in a low voice, "Dumpling, it must be very painful, right?" Dumpling's hand, which was about to swing the chain again, suddenly froze. A trace of struggle appeared in her eyes, as if she was fighting against something fiercely. However, at this moment, the 6th pattern of the ancestral golden feather was completed. An astonishing pressure suddenly exploded from Dumpling's body. At this moment, Dumpling suddenly flung her hand away. The chain trembled. A terrifying force rushed over. At this moment, another figure rushed out from below and blocked in front of Chu Luyue. Zichen. Seeing the figure in front of her clearly, Chu Luyue's heart skipped a beat. Zichen suffered the impact, and his body flew out before heavily crashing onto the ground. Moreover, he dragged on the ground for a while and left behind a long trail of blood. Mao Zhen immediately went forward with a frown. Zichen's body was covered with cuts and bruises. Covered in blood, he was almost on the verge of death. He didn't know what kind of terrible torture he had gone through. He helped Zichen up and placed his palm on Zichen's back, injecting his energy into him. Zichen's condition improved a little. He raised his head with difficulty and looked at Chu Luyue and Dumpling. His usually cold and indifferent face was tinged with urgency and worry. He seemed to want to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of blood and his face became even paler. Chu Luyue saw Mao Zhen's help and felt slightly relieved. She turned to look at Dumpling, only to see that Dumpling had suddenly started to devour the surrounding energy at an even faster speed. Her heart skipped a beat. Was Dumpling going to continue opening her meridians? But in her current state, forcefully opening her meridians would not benefit her at all. It would only destroy her body. What was she trying to do? No, she should ask what the person who controlled Dumpling was trying to do. She gritted her teeth and was about to step forward again when Yi Zhao pulled her back. No! In Dumpling's current state, it would be extremely dangerous if she really stepped forward unguarded. Chu Luyue was only able to avoid being affected by Zichen just now. But the same thing would not happen a second time. The only thing we can do now is to forcefully trap Dumpling, Yi Zhao said in a low voice. Chu Luyue turned her head and pursed her lips when she saw Yi Zhao's expression. If she really did that, it would undoubtedly put Dumpling on the opposite side. And in the process, Dumpling would inevitably be injured. But the current situation, okay. Before she could agree, a painful cry suddenly came from the side. Chu Luyue turned around and realized that the person who shouted was Jianghu. His right hand was wrapped in a cloud of black mist, but it dissipated in just a moment. His hand was badly mutilated and looked extremely terrifying. But at this moment he was not looking at his hand. Instead, he was anxiously looking at the rapidly dissipating black mist. Chu Luyue followed his gaze and saw that there was something in the black mist. It was a yin and yang ring. Bang! With a shattering sound, the yin and yang ring broke into pieces. Then, a palm-sized white cup appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The cup was snow-white and looked like high-quality porcelain. However, it was glowing and was different from ordinary white porcelain. A familiar aura and pressure spread out from it. Chu Luyue suddenly realized something. This must be the celestial sect's most precious treasure, the blowing snow goblet. The blowing snow goblet flew towards Dumpling. The chain moved and went straight for the blowing snow goblet. Clang! A crisp sound reverberated throughout the hall. Then, a majestic force surged out from the blowing snow goblet. And this force flowed along the chain and entered Dumpling's body. Jianghu's eyes widened and his face was filled with anger and fear. My blowing snow goblet. His voice was shrill and hoarse. This was one of the 10 great sacred weapons and the most precious treasure of the celestial sect. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, it would be taken away so easily? The flames on Dumpling's body burned even more fiercely. Soon after, she slowly grasped the 2 chains around her wrists. When Chu Luyue saw this scene, she was shocked. Regiment, boom! Before he could finish his sentence, Dumpling had already used all her strength to throw out the 2 chains in her hands. The reddish-gold flames were wrapped in a terrifying force and spread wildly to the surroundings. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 21-29. The entire hall began to tremble violently. Bang! The previously locked door suddenly opened. The people who were enveloped by this terrifying force were swept out before they could even react. On the incomparably hard jade ground, countless ravines crisscrossed, stones flew everywhere, and smoke rose in all directions. The balls of light that were quietly floating in the cave also exploded one after another. Everything fell into extreme chaos and battle. In less than a quarter of an hour, almost everyone in the hall was thrown out. Looking around, everyone was injured to varying degrees, and they were in a very sorry state. However, before they could realize what had happened, the door of the hall closed again. Bang! This sound finally woke everyone up. Looking at the closed door, Nie Hongjie was the first to react. He quickly rushed forward, wanting to open the door. My blowing snow god cup. Give me back my blowing snow god cup. That thing is still trapped inside. However, no matter how Nie Hongjie shouted, the door did not show any signs of opening. He tried to force the door open again, but he realized that with his little strength, he could not fight against it at all. Looking at the door, Nie Hongjie was in a daze. There had never been a time when he realized how lowly and insignificant he was. In the world of God, he was the sect leader of a first-rate family, the Celestial Sect. His status was honorable, and his strength was tyrannical. However, after coming to this hall, he realized that he was nothing. In here, he was like an ant. No matter what happened, he could not fight back. This place, what the hell is this place? Nie Hongjie suddenly could not suppress the intense fear in his heart. He took a few steps back, almost unable to stand still. After a while, he turned around and looked at everyone. Clearly, they were still in deep shock and bewilderment. Everything that had happened here had already exceeded their expectations. Suddenly, Nie Hongjie was shocked and lost his voice. No, Shengguan Yu and Rong Xiu are still inside. After his reminder, everyone immediately searched around and realized that there were indeed no traces of those two people. In the hall, the violent fluctuations gradually calmed down. Almost all the jade on the ground had been shattered. The layer of black fog that previously enveloped the hall had been scattered by the terrifying impact. As for the totem below, half of it had already appeared, and it gradually dimmed. Dumpling was suspended in midair. When the smoke and dust gradually dispersed, she finally seemed to be unable to support herself and fell to the ground. Chu Liuyue's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately wanted to go over. Dumpling! However, before she could get close, an incomparably tyrannical pressure suddenly. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up and saw a huge eye that had appeared in the sky without her noticing. At this moment, that bloodthirsty eye was coldly looking down at them from above. How dare you deceive me? The low and hoarse voice sounded distant and indistinct, but it still sent chills down one's spine. Chu Liuyue's eyes. This was the voice of the owner of this eye and the hand under Thousand Wine Mountain. However, she quickly realized that this sentence was directed at Dumpling. Bam! There was a heavy thud. She quickly turned around and looked at Dumpling. Dumpling's hands were still tightly bound by the chains. Her small body was curled up on the ground. She was covered in blood and did not move at all. The pure gold flames on her body were still burning, but her aura was much weaker than before. Chu Liyue instantly understood something. Dumpling did it on purpose. She had already woken up. Cough, cough, cough. A weak cough was heard. Dumpling's small body was trembling. Then she slowly and firmly stood up. Then she looked up and met Chu Liyue's eyes. Although her eyes were still scarlet, they were very clear. Chu Liyue felt relieved. Dumpling wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and smiled. Then she looked up at the eye and said word by word, "Who do you think you are? How dare you try to control me? Dream on." At that time, she was focused on saving Zichen. In a moment of desperation, she lost her mind and allowed the other party to take advantage of her. She seemed to be trapped somewhere. Although she could hear the sounds outside and know what was happening outside, she could not escape and control her own body. Until Yizhao and Chu Liyue's voices. Actually, she had already woken up when Chu Liyue touched the wound on her arm. She did that because she wanted to send all those people out and also because she wanted to take the opportunity to destroy the hall. She vaguely sensed that her being controlled had something to do with the hall, especially the totem that was gradually appearing on the ground. Fortunately, she had made the right bet. An idea popped up in Chu Liyue's mind, and the beautiful soft armor was summoned. She tiptoed and arrived in front of Dumpling. "Dumpling, I'm late." "Ah, you." Dumpling's nose twitched and she wanted to walk towards her. However, the moment she moved, the chain clanged. Chu Liyue took half a step back and took out the great azure sun axe. "Dumpling, don't move. I'll help you break this thing." Dumpling nodded and obediently reached out her hand. Chu Liyue raised the great azure sun axe high and slammed it down. Clang. In an instant, sparks flew. However, only a shallow mark was left on the black chain. Chu Liyue's heart sank. The great azure sun axe was a sacred weapon. There were not many treasures in the world that could compare to it. However, this chain was extremely hard. Even the great azure sun axe could not do anything to it. Naive. That voice seemed to have a hint of mockery. With your current strength, it's wishful thinking for you to sever this chain. Suddenly, a deep and cold voice sounded. "What about I?" Chu Liyue turned around and saw Rong Xiu looking up at the eye. At this moment, his side was facing her, so she could not see his expression. She could only feel the shocking pressure and coldness that was constantly spreading from his body. Chu Liyue was stunned. That feeling came again. The current Rong Xiu was very different from his usual self. However, this thought only flashed past her mind. Because in the next moment, Rong Xiu made his move. Buzz buzz. A strange buzzing sound was heard. She looked up. A huge golden Shen formation was suspended in the air and slowly rotating. This Shen formation was the sky shuttle formation that Rong Xiu used to suppress the eye. Golden light flowed and shone brightly. Chu Liyue even faintly felt a tightness in her chest. She almost could not breathe. Her heart skipped a beat. The aura on Rong Xiu's body was much stronger than that of Yi Wentao. At this moment, Rong Xiu was looking up. Two flames, one golden and one black, were burning in his eyes. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2130. The gaze of the eye above seemed to have landed on him. The black flame in Rong Xiu's eye suddenly jumped up and burned even more fiercely. A thin layer of ice quickly spread under his feet. The next moment, he suddenly raised his hand and clenched it in Dumpling's direction. Crack! The two chains on Tuanzi's wrists broke at once. "Ah, you!" Dumpling was stunned for a moment, then she quickly threw herself into Chu Liyue's arms. Chu Liyue hugged her tightly. "Where's Zichen?" Dumpling asked. Chu Liyue carefully wiped the blood off her face. "Don't worry. Zichen is safe now." When Dumpling was about to go on a rampage, she had a bad feeling and summoned Zichen back into her body. Fortunately, Zichen was not restrained at that time, and with Mao Zhen's help, her body recovered a little. The whole process went smoothly. "You go back first," Chu Liyue ordered. Dumpling hugged her neck tightly. "But that eye was very dangerous. Be a good girl." Chu Liyue's tone was gentle and firm. Now that she had saved Dumpling, she would not let the previous incident happen again. She had cut off contact with Dumpling, and they could not sense each other. She had even seen her go through so much, Chu Liyue's heart trembled slightly. She kissed Dumpling's forehead and said word by word, "Don't worry. Don't worry, I'll help you and Zichen pay for all the suffering you've suffered." After comforting Dumpling, Chu Liyue stood up and looked up. "From the beginning to the end, your target was me, wasn't it?" Although it was a question, her tone was very firm. This was the only reasonable answer that could explain everything that had happened before. "Do I have something you want?" she continued to ask. The other party did not answer her question. There was silence in the hall. Chu Liyue swallowed the taste of blood in his mouth, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. Then, a black shadow flashed in front of her, and the armillary shield appeared in her hand. Clang! The armillary shield heavily smashed onto the ground. A few cracks quickly spread out. "You want this, right?" Chu Liyue patted the armillary shield with his hand. The black shield was immediately stained with several scarlet bloodstains. The corners of her lips curled up, but her eyes were filled with killing intent. "If you want it, Come and get it yourself if you have the ability. Chu Liyue's voice fell, and the surroundings were silent for a long time. Finally, the eye looked at her mockingly. Even though it did not say a word, Chu Liyue could clearly see its contempt and disdain. His gaze was high and mighty, and he seemed to find her words laughable. A venerable god and a high god? It seems that you two are very confident in yourselves. Chu Liyue ignored the voice. Instead, she lifted her clothes and sat down cross-legged. If a high god could not do it, she would become a venerable god. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on her knees. In the next moment, the surrounding energy of heaven and earth suddenly began to wildly surge into her body. Everyone who was waiting outside the main hall suddenly noticed the abnormality. An energy vortex appeared in the air above the hall. Countless amounts of energy of heaven and earth were surging downward. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what was happening. Sun Yi, who was standing at the back of the crowd, suddenly frowned. This commotion was clearly caused by his master's cultivation. To devour so much energy at the same time, was she tired of living? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2131. Creak. The sound of a door opening came from behind them. Sun Yi and the rest turned around and realized that the stone door that had been closed since they entered had suddenly opened. Everyone in the courtyard was stunned. What's going on? The stone door is open. Can we leave now? I don't think so. I think there's something fishy about this. It's best not to act rashly. Everyone discussed among themselves. After a long while, no one chose to step forward. Every inch of this place was filled with danger. They had already suffered quite a bit previously and had witnessed the deaths of several people. Naturally, they did not dare to take the risk. It's safest to leave now. Chang Wanzhou looked at the stone door and suddenly muttered. Mao Zhen stood beside Chang Wanzhou and asked curiously, "What did you say just now?" Chang Wanzhou pursed his lips. "I said that it'll only be more dangerous if we continue to stay here. If we don't leave now, it'll be difficult to leave in the future." Mao Zhen was stunned. "How did you know?" Chang Wanzhou paused. "I guessed." Mao Zhen felt that it didn't seem like it. This young man had been silent the entire time. Why would he say something like that just because he had some guesses? He was very sure of it. However, even they couldn't guarantee that this was the best time to leave. How did he know? Mao Zhen was about to ask again when Sun Yi spoke first. "I'll go take a look." With that, he walked straight towards the stone door. Everyone's gaze was focused on him. Curiosity, surprise, suspicion. Sun Yi turned a blind eye to this. He quickly arrived in front of the stone door and stepped out without hesitation. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. Nothing happened, and Sun Yi walked out of the stone door safely. He waited for a moment, looked at the barrier outside, and then walked back. The barrier outside has been opened as well. The crowd was in an uproar when they heard that. The barrier has been opened as well? Shiru asked in shock. Sun Yi nodded and cupped his hands. "Second Miss Shi, this place is dangerous. You can't stay here for long. You should leave first." Shiru didn't expect Sun Yi to say that and was momentarily stunned. But you and the others are still inside," Sun Yi said. "Master and His Highness have their own ways to deal with it. For now, please protect yourselves." Shiru hesitated. On one hand, she was worried about the two people who were still trapped in the hall. On the other hand, she was very clearly aware that Sun Yi's words weren't without reason. Actually, she had already vaguely sensed that something was wrong with these people being chased out at the same time. After all, under such circumstances, it would be even more dangerous to stay inside. Now that the stone door was open, both enchantments were open. It was indeed the best time to leave. If he continued to stay here, he might even cause more trouble for them. She thought for a moment and quickly made a decision. "Good. Let's go outside and wait. We will naturally advance and retreat together with Master." Sun Yi said calmly, not allowing anyone to object. Although Sun Yi's expression was as calm and indifferent as before, his eyes were extremely resolute. Mao Zhen said, "He's right. You guys can't stay here any longer. Leaving as soon as possible was the best choice. As for this place, we will definitely not let anything happen to that girl and Rongxiu. Shi Ruiyer's mind suddenly calmed down a lot. Based on what Sun Yi said, Mao Jin and Yi Zhao were planning to stay. If the two of them were to lend a hand, the situation should be much better. After all, everyone present might not be a match for the two of them even if they were to join forces. She responded and left with the few elders. After that, Sun Yi looked at Yao Bin. Without waiting for him to speak, Yao Bin said, "We heard what you wanted to say just now. We plan to do the same as the meteor sect and wait outside temporarily. We only hope that Master Yu and the Holy Sun will be successful." Sun Yi's lips moved slightly as he nodded lightly. Soon, under Yao Bin's lead, the people from Purple Light County also walked out of the stone door. Seeing that the people from Purple Light County and Meteor Sect had left safely, many people were tempted. Originally, everyone came here for the treasures. However, after coming here, they didn't find any treasures. Instead, they got themselves into trouble. Thinking back to the scene of the treasures exploding one after another in the main hall, they still felt a lingering fear. This place was extremely strange. If they stayed any longer, they might not be able to protect their lives. What was there to be reluctant to leave? Soon after, without Sun Yi saying anything, many people chose to leave. However, there were still some people who chose to stay for various reasons. Sun Yi ignored them. He persuaded Shi Ruiyer and the others to leave because he didn't want to waste his master's goodwill. If something happened to them, then his master's efforts would all go to waste. As for the rest, what did their lives have to do with him? The snow-blowing god goblet is still inside. It must have fallen into the hands of the two of them. Nie Hongjie looked at the tightly shut door of the main hall and gnashed his teeth. His heart was filled with hatred. At first, he didn't realize what was going on. However, everything was clear now. That crimson gold heavenly phoenix chased them out, leaving only Chu Luiyue and Rongxiu. Obviously, there was something fishy going on. Now, Sun Yi and the others were persuading everyone to leave. This was even stranger. They obviously wanted to take over everything here. From the beginning to the end, it was all a show directed by them. "Father, what should we do now? Are we going to let them off so easily?" Nyeruyun's tone was filled with resentment. One of her hands was completely destroyed, and there were many injuries on her body. In the future, it would be very difficult for her to recover to her previous state, let alone continue cultivating. She pushed all the blame to Chu Luiyue and Dumpling. Nie Hongjie took a deep breath and said, "Wait. If the two of them died inside, then it would be fine. However, if they successfully came out, he would definitely settle this score. Even if Mao Zhen and Yi Zhao were here, he didn't care. In any case, they would be the ones in the right. Mao Zhen and Yi Zhao wouldn't easily get involved in this matter with their statuses. He had to get an explanation." Sun Yi glanced indifferently at Nie Hongjie and the others. His eyes were calm. Some people had a death wish and no one could stop them. He looked at Chang Wanzhou and raised his eyebrows. "You're not going out?" Chang Wanzhou was only a high god now. It was very dangerous for him to stay here. Chang Wanzhou shook his head. Sun Yi didn't say anything else. His gaze returned to the main hall. At the moment, the energy vortex above was still expanding. Even Her Eminence would find it hard to absorb so much energy at once, let alone Chu Luiyue, a high deity. "I wonder how Master is doing now." Sun Yi frowned imperceptibly. Wonderful book room. Chapter 2132. Bang! The stone door closed. Sun Yi seemed to have expected this and did not turn around. Chang Wanzhou felt a slight headache. This had happened several times recently, and each time, he felt as if something was about to burst out of his mind, but it would eventually return to normal. As expected, this time was the same. After a while, the pain disappeared, but his back was covered in cold sweat. The wind blew, and his sweat was cold. He shook his head and suppressed these thoughts, returning to his usual cold and taciturn self. Mao Zhen looked at him thoughtfully, then quickly withdrew her gaze. Everyone began to wait. But this wait lasted for a month. More importantly, During this time, the surrounding energy of heaven and earth was constantly surging toward the palace. Precisely because of this, the people who remained in the courtyard did not experience the same situation as they did at the beginning, where they absorbed too much energy and their bodies were unable to bear it. At first, they were shocked, but after thinking about it, Chu Luiyue had the 2 Tian baby, so it was understandable that she could devour this energy. As for the people who came out of the barrier closed not long after they came out. They could not see what was going on inside from the outside, and could only vaguely see the palace and the energy vortex above it. Shi Ru'er put his hands together and silently prayed, hoping that they could all return safely. In the center of the palace, Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged. Her entire body was already enveloped by countless silver-red starlight. These starlight gathered like a flood and slowly flowed around her. At the edges, there were only black spatial cracks in the void. This was Chu Luiyue's god domain. The energy that surged in from all directions silently fused into the god domain, and after being purified and refined, it flowed into her limbs and bones. This greatly increased the efficiency of her cultivation. Her eyes were tightly shut, and she did not move, but her aura was constantly growing stronger. In truth, it had been a long time since she became a high god. However, it wasn't easy for any cultivator to break through from high god to god. The huge gap between the two was not something that could be bridged simply by diligent cultivation. Some people could cultivate for their entire lives, but they could only stop at the threshold of becoming a god, unable to take that final step. Therefore, even if there were cultivators like Chu Luiyue, who possessed boundless natural energy, there was no guarantee that they would be able to break through to godhood. However, Chu Luiyue had to make a breakthrough this time. Fortunately, she had a Tianjing Yuan meridian. Furthermore, after establishing a life contract with Dumpling, her Yuan meridian's tolerance had become much stronger than before. Furthermore, within her dantian, there was a water droplet that could store an immeasurable amount of energy. With these two conditions, it was not impossible for Chu Luiyue to forcefully break through to godhood in a short time. Rong Xiu stood not far in front of her, his back to her, his hands behind his back. He slowly opened his eyes. The 2 flames in his eyes had quietly dissipated, and they had returned to their initial calmness. The layer of ice beneath his feet had also melted. He looked up slightly at that eye, his gaze extremely cold. However, there was a mocking smile in that eye, as if a prank had succeeded. "I didn't think that you would be willing to come with her. What a pity! You were so close." The distant voice fell into his ears. Rong Xiu knew very well that this voice was meant for him. Chu Luiyue, who was behind him, could not hear it. He said flatly, "You're just a broken body, but you've got guts." These words seemed to have poked at the other party's sore spot. Anger and killing intent instantly surged in that eye. "So what? Now, aren't all of you trapped here as well? You're under my control. Rong Xiu, you don't dare to do anything here." Rong Xiu's expression was still calm. So what? He knew where the boundary was. Even before, he still did not cross that line. He could not do anything, but she could. As long as she broke through to godhood, he closed his eyes and did not speak again. Red Moon Desert. Night fell, and a red full moon appeared in the night sky. It was another red moon night. A faint red color enveloped the desert as if it was covered with a layer of fog. In the depths of the desert, the night wind swept through, and ripples appeared on the originally calm lake. Then the lake split in the middle, and a figure walked out. It was Dugumabao. He looked up at the sky, and then at the end of the desert. A palace that was flickering with light was faintly discernible. "It's not over there yet?" Diwu Zhangze and Lan Shao came up together. When they saw this scene, they were stunned. Dugumabao retracted his gaze. "Time is of the essence. Let's begin." Lan Shao coughed. "Let's make this clear first. My body can't take the torture now. You must be gentle later." A purplish gold scale armor flew out of Dugumabao's hand. The scale armor expanded in the wind, and in the blink of an eye, it transformed into a huge Xian formation. He looked at Lan Shao coldly. "Hurry up if you don't want to die." Lan Shao pursed his lips, walked over, and lay in the middle of the Xian formation. Diwu Zhangzi asked nervously, "Big Bao, is this really feasible?" Duguma Bao said, "We have to try whether it works or not. Now that thing is busy dealing with you and Rong Xiu. If we don't do it now, who knows when the next opportunity will come." With that, he waved his hand. In an instant, strong winds blew in the desert. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2133. The heaven and earth energy quickly flowed towards the Xian formation. Streaks of light gradually appeared and enveloped Lan Xiao. He unconsciously clenched his fists tightly. It was impossible to say that he wasn't nervous. He had failed the previous time and almost got himself into big trouble. If he still couldn't succeed this time, he probably wouldn't be able to try again in the next 1,000 years. He teased Duguma Bao just now to cover up the nervousness and uneasiness in his heart. Boom! In the sky, behind the dark and churning clouds, a silver heavenly lightning suddenly flashed. Then, there was a second, third. Not long later, the sky above Lan Xiao had turned into a sea of lightning. At a glance, there were at least a few hundred of them. Duguma Bao glanced at Lan Xiao. Lan Xiao seemed to have sensed something. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "Debao, remember to give this young master a handsome, suave, and elegant face. Once the divine body is reconstructed, the face can't be changed." Diwu Zhangzi couldn't help but say, "It's already good enough to have a face. Why are you thinking so much?" Lan Xiao had failed once before. This time, even with Duguma Bao's help, he might not be able to reconstruct the divine body successfully. He, on the other hand, was still thinking about that face. Lan Xiao pouted. "People like you won't be able to understand the joy and sorrow of being a beauty." Boom! Duguma Bao waved his hand, and a silver snake-like tongue suddenly struck down. And it accurately struck Lan Xiao's face. In an instant, there were crackling sounds and sparks everywhere. Lan Xiao's remaining words were all stuck in his throat. Woo woo woo. This was too sudden. He wasn't ready yet. Tianlei, which contained a shocking amount of power, transformed into countless tiny silver lights and gradually seeped into Lan Xiao's body, surging towards his limbs and bones. His body was now translucent, so one could clearly see the flow and distribution of the power in his body from the side. Finally, the power of Tianlei gradually dissipated. Without giving Lan Xiao any time to react, Duguma Bao struck again. Boom boom boom. With the first Dao, the rest of the Dao became logical. Numerous bolts of lightning struck from the sky one after another, landing on Lan Xiao's body below. As time passed, his body became more and more solid, almost completely covered by the silver flowing light. From afar, it looked like a huge silver cocoon. The huge commotion in the sky quickly attracted the attention of Shirer and the others. What's going on there? Tianlei keeps falling. Could it be that someone is making a breakthrough or refining? In this Red Moon Desert, other than us, there shouldn't be anyone else, right? And with such a huge commotion, why does it feel so strange? That's right. Even if you want to break through to godhood, you don't need so much Tianlei, do you? This place is really strange. Forget it, let's not go there. It's better to be careful. Everything that happened in the desert was far beyond anyone's expectations. They had already suffered losses, so they were especially cautious now. After a while, the commotion in Tianlei gradually died down. The half of the sky that was lit up by the silver Tianlei gradually dimmed. Looks like it's over, Shirer mumbled softly. Suddenly, she widened her eyes in shock. No. What's that? Hearing her cry of surprise, everyone looked over again, and then they all sucked in a breath of cold air. Golden Tianlei? In the dark sky far away, dark clouds rolled and the wind howled. A dazzling golden light suddenly appeared and tore through the darkness. It really was a golden Tianlei. This level of Tianlei is rarely seen in the world. Why did it suddenly appear now? Everyone was shocked. Even for them, there were very few who had seen a golden Tianlei with their own eyes. Something big must have happened. Then, under everyone's nervous and shocked gazes, the golden Tianlei fell with a loud boom. The silver Tianlei gathers the flesh and blood, while the golden Tianlei gathers the bones. Diu Zhangzi stood at the side, his heart in his throat. The process of reconstructing a divine body was extremely difficult and painful. For the current Lan Xiao, he didn't have a physical body. To reconstruct a divine body was even more complicated and difficult. To put it bluntly, from hair to toes, every inch of flesh and blood in the body had to be processed bit by bit. There was no room for mistakes. If it was to reconstruct a physical body, it would be much easier to borrow a skeleton. But Lan Xiao couldn't. There was no skeleton in the world that could withstand this pressure. It was the same for Dugamabao back then, especially since they had just gone through a dangerous month. Whether it was Lan Xiao or Dugamabao, they weren't in good condition now. But this was indeed a rare opportunity. If they missed it, who knew how long they would have to wait? So even if the hope was slim, they had to do it. That golden Tianlei fell and directly pierced through Lan Xiao's body. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was painful and enduring. It was obvious that he was experiencing unimaginable pain. But he still clenched his teeth and refused to let out any weak cries of pain. The Xian formation under him flowed as if it was guiding and clearing the energy in his body. That golden Tianlei didn't shatter like the silver Tianlei before. Instead, it transformed into a stream of light and slowly but firmly extended toward Lan Xiao's left arm. It was as if it was tearing his flesh apart. Lan Xiao endured it. Then, that golden stream of light slowly condensed into the shape of two connected bones. Then, one of them split into 5 small streams of light and gradually formed 5 fingers. This was a completely reconstructed arm. Lan Xiao let out a long sigh and grinned. It's really King painful. When I successfully reconstruct my divine body, I'll settle all the old and new grudges together. He remembered each and every one of the accounts clearly. Fine beads of sweat appeared on Dugamabao's forehead, and his lips were slightly pale. Those silver Tianlei were fine, but this golden Tianlei was indeed troublesome. With his current realm and strength, forcefully summoning it would consume a lot of energy. But this was just the beginning. He waved his wrist. Boom! The second golden heavenly thunder came in response. There's more. Sure, and the rest didn't know what to say. A golden Tianlei was already very rare, but it appeared consecutively this time. If it's not a treasure appearing, but someone breaking through or refining a divine weapon, how powerful would that person be? Sure, muttered, and the shock that was spreading didn't fade away. Boom! At this moment, there was a sudden clap of thunder in the sky above the palace. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2134. Everyone turned around and saw that there was also a natural phenomenon here. Endless heaven and earth energy was surging toward the palace at an even faster speed. Several silver Tianlei surged out from behind the clouds. What's going on? Someone's about to break through? They stood nearby. Although they were separated by the barrier, they could see that this was indeed a sign that someone was about to break through. There's only Shangguanyu and Rong Xiu inside, and Rong Xiu is already a god. Then, it was obvious who was preparing to break through. How is this possible? Shangguanyu isn't even 20 years old this year, and rumor has it that she broke through when Lingxiao College encountered a calamity. How long has it been since then? But if it's not her, it can't be Rong Xiu, right? No one in the Divine Ruins world has broken through the threshold above a god in 10,000 years, right? It's probably Shangguanyu. Have you all forgotten how many trump cards she has? She might really be able to take this opportunity to break through and become a god. The people outside the barrier were discussing animatedly, while the people inside the barrier had fallen into a strange silence. They could see more clearly than the people outside, so when the Tianlei appeared, they were certain that it was indeed Chu Luiwei who had summoned it. She was really planning to break through in the palace. Sun Yi had one hand behind his back. His expression was calm, and only his slightly furrowed brows showed his nervousness and worry. He had never doubted his master's talent and strength, but this time it was too sudden. Forcefully devouring so much energy to break through would increase the risk by a lot. He could only hope that everything would go smoothly for his master. While they were worried about Chu Luiyue, Nie Hongjie and the others were extremely upset by the scene before them. They had thought that Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu would be trapped inside and would have no way to seek help. But now, it seemed that was not the case at all. Chu Luiyue actually wanted to take this opportunity to break through to become a god. Compared to them, who had fled pathetically, the difference was like heaven and earth. This was simply trampling on their faces. It's extremely difficult to break through from a high god to a god. Sheng Guanyu is really crazy. Nie Hongjie gritted his teeth and said hatefully. Nie Ruyun pursed her lips. Due to her serious injuries, her face was pale and her breathing was weak. If Nie Hongjie had not given her medicine, she would not have been able to hold on. But even so, her vision still turned black. Suddenly she staggered and almost fell. Nie Hongjie hurriedly helped her. Ruyun. Why don't you go over there and rest for a while? Nie Ruyun shook his head, his eyes glaring at the magnificent palace in front of him, full of resentment. No, I want to watch her fail with my own eyes. I want to see her suffer a crushing defeat. It would be best if he could die without a burial ground. Hearing this, Nie Hongjie patted her arm to comfort her. Don't worry. She just became a high god not long ago. There's no way she will succeed this time. Let's just wait and see. Rumor had it that she had defeated Yi Wentao with the help of 2 godly beasts and many other trump cards. If she fought alone, her combat power would be greatly reduced. Did he think that he could become a god just because he won that battle? She was too naive. Nie Hongjie was considered talented. Otherwise, he would not have been able to become the sect leader of Celestial Sect. Even so, it took him 20 years to break through from a high god to a god. This Sheng Guanyu thinks too highly of herself. Boom. Before he could finish his sentence, a golden Tianlei appeared. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. Nie Ruyun frowned and asked, Father, I remember that when you became a god, you didn't summon a golden Tianlei. She was already in her teens when Nie Hongjie became a god. She had witnessed it with her own eyes. That was why she remembered it so clearly. Nie Hongjie's lips moved, but he did not know what to say. He was not the only one. No cultivator in the world would experience something like this when they became a god. Now, Chu Luiyue summoned a golden Tianlei. That was abnormal. The people waiting outside were speechless when they saw this. Shi Re looked from one side to the other. Her beautiful eyes slowly widened. At this moment, 2 seas of lightning appeared in the dark night sky. More importantly, golden Tianlei appeared on both sides. The 2 seas of lightning faced each other from afar, lighting up half the sky. Even though they were already outside the barrier, they could still clearly feel the astonishing pressure. He really didn't know what kind of person could withstand the descent of such a terrifying force. Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged in the Great Hall. The silver-red god domain around her had completely surrounded her. It was surging rapidly, endlessly devouring the power and pouring it into her body. The power came from everywhere, flowing along her limbs and bones, washing her yuan meridian, flesh, and bones. Finally, it all flowed into her dantian. The water droplet shone brilliantly. It was like a bottomless pit, calmly taking in all the power. Then, it separated some of it and poured it all over Chu Luiyue. Intense pain came from all over her body. Her yuan meridian glowed faintly with reddish gold light. Her body's endurance had already reached its limit. If she did not have the life contract with Dumpling, if her yuan meridian did not have this last layer of protection, she would have exploded long ago. A streak of dark red blood flowed from the corner of her lips. The eye looked down at her from above as if it was looking at an ant. Of course, it was not easy to break through from a high god to a god. The most fundamental and crucial point was the yuan meridian. If any cultivator wanted to cross that threshold, they had to have enough energy stored up, and they had to have a yuan meridian that was strong enough. Generally speaking, a cultivator's yuan meridian was destined from birth and could not be improved through cultivation. But a god was different. A high god had to cultivate continuously and use their divine power to temper their yuan meridian countless times. Only when they reached a certain limit could they break through the shackles and improve their yuan meridian, officially breaking through to a god. Chu Luiwei had enough power now, but she had only been a high god for a short period of time. Her yuan meridian had not been fully tempered. How could she succeed? Now, she only had two choices: give up on the breakthrough immediately, or persevere until her yuan meridian exploded. However, no matter which option she chose, she would end up with the same ending: failure. Rong Xiu turned around and looked at her fixedly. He slowly clenched his fists, and there seemed to be waves in his eyes that were bottomless. At this moment, the sound of a zither came from Chu Liyue's body. Wonderful book room. Chapter 2135. The sound of the zither came out of nowhere. It was bleak, desolate, and indescribably vast and brazen. Rong Xiu's eyes flashed. He slowly relaxed his clenched fists as a faint light flashed in his eyes. Then he looked up at the eye above him. His lips curled up as if he was smiling. I have never really thought of making a move. But the energy you have here is excellent for you, to use. Boundless anger and killing intent surged out of the eye. Rong Xiu, how dare you lie to me? He had done it on purpose from the beginning. He wanted to steal the energy of heaven and earth here for Chu Luiwei. Rong Xiu's lips curved up into a perfect curve as he lightly laughed. I didn't want her to become a god so quickly, but since you delivered the opportunity to me, I had no choice but to accept it. Although the process would be arduous, the benefits of becoming a god outweighed the disadvantages for Chu Luiwei. He was just taking advantage of the situation. You, before that voice could fade, another zither sound came from Chu Luiwei's body. She closed her eyes, her thick and long eyelashes fluttering. If the first sound was like an ignorant child casually plucking the strings of a zither, then the second sound was clearly much more powerful than the first. Strength, technique, and melody. Then, several zither sounds rang out. She clearly did not have a zither in her hands, but the zither sounds formed a strange melody that spread far and wide. Along with the zither sounds, a yuan meridian in her body suddenly ruptured. Then, the reddish-gold light enveloped it again. Compared to before, her yuan meridian had clearly expanded and become much tougher. Chu Luiwei forcefully tore her yuan meridian and used the endless origin power and zither sounds to temper it. She had just become a god and did not have enough time to temper her yuan meridian until it was tough enough. But since this was the only way to become a god, she would do it herself. Intense pain came from every part of her body. Chu Liyue's ears buzzed. Only the sound of the zither echoed. The sound of the guqin reverberated throughout the hall and then drifted out, filling the huge courtyard. The sound of the zither seemed to have materialized as it heavily hit the stone door, making a dull sound. Then, the stone door opened, and the sound of a zither overflowed. The sound of the zither was formless, but at this moment, everyone felt as if they could see its trajectory. Rumble! The golden Tianlei in the sky finally came crashing down. At this moment, a figure broke out from the palace. Everyone was shocked and hurriedly looked over. It's Shangguan Yu! Someone exclaimed. Everyone's eyes were focused on her. In the night sky, the woman stood in the air. Her red dress and black hair fluttered in the wind. She stood under the dazzling sea of lightning. The light shone on her face and body. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked up. The golden Tianlei had already arrived above her head. The golden light was reflected in her ink-black eyes, and it was dazzling. Then she raised her hand. The girl's hand was as slender and fair as a spring onion. It was soft and boneless, delicate and warm. When everyone saw this, they could not help but hold their breaths. What was she trying to do? Then, they saw Chu Luiwei gently pluck the air with her finger. She seemed to be playing the zither, but there was nothing in front of her. No. In the next moment, everyone overturned that thought. That was because a golden light had suddenly appeared under her palm. It was the golden heavenly lightning that had silently arrived at her palm. With just a slight movement, the golden Tianlei collapsed. Bam! The golden Tenlei transformed into countless golden streams of light and instantly surged into her body. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2136. She used the golden Tianlei as her string, and used the illusory energy of heaven and earth for her own use. Under the dark sky, the golden radiance spilled everywhere like a dream. Chu Liuyue's Yuan meridian shattered one after another. After absorbing the energy, it was quickly healed by the scarlet gold flames. The process was extremely painful, but it was also extremely fast and effective. Every inch of her muscles, bones, and flesh was undergoing a shocking transformation in an instant. Everyone was dead silent. The scene seemed to have frozen. Even the air seemed to have frozen at this moment. When they saw the golden Tianlei being summoned, they were curious about how Chu Luiyue would deal with it. However, the scene before them had far exceeded their expectations. What did she do just now? That golden Tianlei shattered just like that? A murmur filled with shock came from the crowd. Everyone heard it clearly, but no one answered. This was because they did not know what the answer was. Ever since they knew that Chu Luiyue intended to break through to become a god, things had developed in a direction that they could not predict. They thought that the appearance of the golden Tianlei would forcefully stop her cultivation progress, but it was the complete opposite. The shocking power contained within seemed to have been converted into her origin power. Nie Hongxia's eyes widened. He looked up at the scene in the sky, and his mind went blank for a moment. Even though he had seen many things over the years, he was still stunned at this moment. Father, what's she doing? Nie Ruyun panicked. He looked at him in panic and disbelief. The uneasiness in his heart grew. Before Chu Luiyue came out, he could still comfort himself when he saw the terrifying energy vortex. He thought that Chu Luiyue must be trapped in the hall and experiencing extreme pain. It would not be long before she was done for. However, Chu Luiyue had come out now. Moreover, she had easily taken on the golden Tianlei. Nie Ruyun knew very well that if it were her, she wouldn't be able to retaliate against the golden Tianlei that contained boundless power. Even if she didn't die, she would be crippled. However, Chu Luiyue did not seem to have any abnormalities. In fact, her aura was still rising. That meant he was almost at the peak of the high god realm. He was only a step away from becoming an eminent god. Is she really going to break through to godhood? Father, she definitely can't do it, right? Nie Ruyun asked with the last bit of hope. However, Nie Hongjia didn't say anything. Of course, he wished that was the case, but the signs of Chu Luiyue breaking through were too clear. He couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. He had thought that she would fail because her Yuan meridian was unable to withstand the refinement of becoming a god, but who would have thought that she would be able to handle Tianlei so easily? Seeing his reaction, Nie Ruyun's heart gradually sank. Bang! A reddish-gold flame suddenly surged out of Chu Liuyue's body and enveloped her. If one were to look carefully, they would be able to see the beautiful soft armor covering her skin under the flames. Many bright colors overlapped, and the light was dazzling. It was powerful and disdainful. Through the flames, everyone could vaguely see her face. Her expression was calm and indifferent. Her eyes were like glaciers that would not melt for 10,000 years, but also like the eternal moonlight. They were cold, aloof, and unapproachable. Sun Yi clasped his hands behind his back and looked up. His eyes, which had always been indifferent, flashed with a wisp of nostalgia and sigh, as well as deep reverence and admiration. Chang Wanzhou stared blankly at this scene, countless chaotic and blurry images flitting through his mind. "You," he muttered unconsciously as if he wanted to say something, but only managed to spit out half of what he wanted to say. "You what?" That sense of familiarity grew stronger, and the guess that had been buried deep in his heart surged once more. It wasn't that he hadn't suspected that she was the person he was looking for. But whether it was age or anything else, it didn't match. Even she herself said that she had never been to southern border, and it was very obvious that he didn't exist in her memory. Chang Wanzhou vaguely felt that he had fallen into a fog and was unable to break free. For some reason, he looked at that stone door again. A thought suddenly appeared. He had left through this stone door before. On the other side of the Red Moon Desert, Lan Zhao's divine body was still being reconstructed. Dugu Mabao had already activated 4 golden Tianlei to help Lan Zhao reconstruct the bones in his limbs. He still needed 2 more before he could succeed. One to reconstruct his skull, and the other to congeal his spirit. Diwu Zhangze looked at Dugu Mabao worriedly. At this moment, his face was very pale. It was obvious that he had reached his limit. But the last 2 Tianlei were the most troublesome. He didn't know if Big Bao, can you still hold on? Diwu Zhangze asked worriedly. Dugu Mabao didn't say anything. He only mobilized the energy around him, clearly intending to continue. At this point, this was the only choice. If he stopped now, all his previous efforts would be wasted. It was fine for him, but Lan Zhao might not be able to endure such torture again. He looked at the sky in the distance. Is you going to break through to become a god? Diwu Zhangze nodded. Should be. She summoned the golden Tianlei just now, and it seems that she has withstood it. It's only a matter of time before she breaks through to become a god. It's just that, it's so sudden this time. She must have suffered a lot. Dugu Mabao pursed his lips, and a trace of guilt flashed past his eyes. In the end, I didn't think it through. He originally only wanted to open the door and let those people come over to help you, or find Dumpling and Zichen. But the development of things had already deviated from his plan. That thing actually took this opportunity to forcefully devour everyone's energy. Not only did it strengthen itself, but it also forcefully opened Dumpling's meridians. After being suppressed in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years, he thought that thing would be more restrained. He didn't expect it to still be so domineering, forcing you, or to break through to become a god. Diwu Zhangze shook his head and tried to persuade him. You had good intentions, but that thing was too crazy in the end, causing things to reach this stage. You don't have to blame yourself for this. If you didn't open the door and lure those people over, that thing probably wouldn't have summoned that palace. He paused as if he was afraid of something. Anyway, if you can take this opportunity to break through to become a god, it's also a good thing. Anyway, this day would come sooner or later. Dugu Mabao retracted his gaze and looked at Lan Zhao. At this moment, he was already wrapped in a silver and gold cocoon. His eyes were tightly shut, and his brows were furrowed. His consciousness was clear, but he couldn't open his mouth to speak. The pain of reconstructing his muscles and bones was enough to exhaust all his energy. Dugu Mabao waved his hand. A golden Tianlei appeared again. However, this time, the Tianlei didn't fall for a long time. Dugu Mabao's heart sank, and he looked up. That golden bolt of heavenly lightning quietly dissipated. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2137. With his remaining strength, he couldn't activate the Tianlei successfully. This thought quickly appeared in Dugu Mabao's mind, and he broke out in cold sweat. His lips turned pale, and his blood surged. His body shook, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Then his body fell backward uncontrollably. Debao! Startled, Diwu Zhangze hurriedly rushed forward to support him. How are you? Dugu Mabao shook his head, pushed his hand away, and planned to continue. However, before he could do anything, he spat out another mouthful of blood. Diwu Zhangze frowned and said anxiously, even if you force yourself, you won't be able to succeed like this. On the one hand, Dugu Mabao had forcefully reconstructed his divine body to save Chu Luiyue. In the end, he was trapped in this small divine body, and his strength was limited to a certain extent. On the other hand, the critical month had just passed, and his strength and mental energy were greatly depleted. It was even more difficult to reconstruct Lan Zhao's divine body. The Tianlei in front had almost emptied all of Dugu Mabao's energy. He had always been very strong and wanted to do his best no matter what he encountered. Now that the 5th golden Tianlei had collapsed, it was obvious that he couldn't hold on any longer. I'm too useless after all. Diwu Zhangze was filled with hatred. If he could reconstruct his divine body, he would be able to help Dugu Mabao a lot. However, he could only watch. This time, it would probably end in failure again. Dugu Mabao's vision turned black, and blood kept flowing out of the corner of his mouth. However, he was really unwilling to give up. At this moment, Lan Shao, who had been silent all this while, suddenly opened his eyes. He tilted his head, looked over, and smiled. Looks like I'm really not that lucky. I've failed twice in a row. Debeo, let's forget it. The light flickered, and his face looked very blurry. However, it wasn't hard to imagine the curve of his lips when he heard this voice. As usual, he was relaxed, lazy, and casual. We'll just wait a little longer. What was 1,000 or 800 years? This young master had already waited for over 10,000 years. A little more time wouldn't make a difference, right? But with your small body, if you were to be tormented and damaged, wouldn't this young master have to take full responsibility? If it was in the past, Dugu Mabao would not have given him a good look after hearing his ridicule. But now, he clenched his teeth and sank into silence. Something seemed to be surging in his purple eyes. Diu Zhangzi heaved a long sigh inwardly. Actually, even if Lan Shao didn't say it, he knew that Lan Shao had always been looking forward to reconstructing his divine body. He had been suppressed here like a lonely ghost for tens of thousands of years, countless long days and nights. How could he not care at all? All these years, Lan Shao had changed his face countless times and found pleasure in doing so. He seemed to be extremely narcissistic, but who dared to say that he didn't want to regain his divine body? He knew, and so did Dugu Mabao. Therefore, even though they knew that it would be difficult, they still chose to give it a try. Unfortunately, without the Tianlei surging over, the light on the cocoon gradually dimmed. Streaks of silver light seemed to have lost some kind of restraint and started to escape in all directions. Then, they quietly dissipated and transformed back into the energy of heaven and earth, merging into the wind. Lan Shao cursed softly. It hurts whether it succeeds or not. This young master is really unlucky. To him, this process was like an invisible knife cutting off his flesh bit by bit. It was no different from death by 1,000 cuts. He had endured the pain from before with much difficulty, but now he had to go through it again. Gradually, his voice became softer, and there was an unconcealable look of pain between his brows. Diu Zhangzi stood up and sent out a wave of energy, wanting to help Lan Shao relieve some of the pain. But it was just a drop in the bucket. More and more streaks of light scattered in all directions. When the silver Tianlei's flesh was completely stripped off, it was time to shatter his bones. Time passed slowly. Experiencing pain was always especially unbearable. After an unknown period of time, the last section of Chu Liyue's Yuan meridian finally shattered. Then, it was wrapped by the reddish-gold flame again and repaired. At this point, all of her Yuan meridians had been completely refined. Chu Liyue calmed down and gathered all the energy in her body, condensing it into a torrent that surged toward her dantian. Boom! The water droplet that was spinning in her dantian was affected by this energy and rippled violently. A totem gradually flashed into existence. Almost at the same time, the same totem appeared between Chu Liyue's brows. A soft sound came from within her body. At this point, she had finally broken through that threshold and ascended to the realm of Supreme God. In an instant, Chu Liyue's aura skyrocketed. Boundless and violent energy surged out in all directions. Due to the impact of this energy, the void around her started to collapse. She lowered her head slightly and looked at the palace below. There was a hole in the eaves of the palace. That was the mark she had left behind when she had flown into the air. At this moment, through the dark hole, she saw the eye hidden within. She raised her hand, and the reddish-gold flame quickly transformed into a long sword. The next moment, she slashed down. Swoosh! The long sword flew down and pierced straight into that eye. A sharp and shrill cry was heard all of a sudden. Almost at the same time, Rong Xiu, who was also in the palace, stepped on the ground. The sky shuttle array that had been connected to that eye for a long time suddenly exploded. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2138. From this moment onward, the enormous palace began to crumble at a rapid pace. The boundless energy contained within exploded, tearing the void apart. Let's go! Mao Zhen and Yi Zhao reacted the fastest. They immediately moved and retreated outside. Fortunately, Chu Luiwei had already knocked open the stone door, making it much easier for them to leave. Sun Yi looked at the collapsing palace and pursed his lips slightly. An extremely complicated look flashed through his eyes. However, this emotion was fleeting. He quickly retracted his gaze and turned to leave. When he turned back, he saw Chang Wanzhou standing there in a daze. His eyes were dazed as he stared blankly at the palace. He seemed to be thinking about something, but also seemed to be at a loss for what to do. "It's time to go," Sun Yi reminded him in a low voice. Chang Wanzhou suddenly came back to his senses. He glanced at Sun Yi and nodded before turning to leave. The speed and reaction of these few people were the fastest. When they started to move, the other people who were still in the courtyard also finally realized the danger. One by one, they followed and planned to leave. However, it was easy to come, but not so easy to leave. They had just taken a few steps when they suddenly realized that the space here had been swept up by that terrifying energy. It was wreaking havoc and squeezing, making it impossible to move. Blood seeped out of the corner of Niruyun's mouth again. She was in excruciating pain all over her body. She was already injured, and now, it was one disaster after another. She fell to the ground before she could take 2 steps. Nie Hongjie hurriedly went to help her. "Ruyun, how are you?" Nie Ruyun opened her mouth, wanting to speak, but she spat out more blood. Nie Hongjie had no choice but to forcefully help her up and carry her forward. However, his own situation wasn't optimistic either. With Nie Ruyun here, it was one disaster after another. An invisible energy wave swept over, instantly sweeping away and crushing the few people who had fallen behind. In the blink of an eye, there was no sound. Nie Hongjie was even more alarmed. The heaven and earth energy here was already abundant to begin with. Now that it suddenly went berserk, its might was immeasurable. If he was in his best condition, he might have been able to escape. But now, both he and Nie Ruyun were injured. "Ah!" A few short and shrill shouts came from not far behind them. Nie Hongjie hurriedly turned around to take a look, and his pupils immediately shrank. The few people from the celestial sect who were in charge of bringing up the rear were all wiped out. Blood splattered all over the ground, but the person had already disappeared. "Father!" Nie Ruyun was so scared that she began to cry and tremble all over. "Father, are we going to die here?" "Don't talk nonsense." Nie Hongjie clenched his teeth, waved down a barrier, and rushed forward at an even faster speed. No matter what, they absolutely could not leave their lives here. However, his barrier couldn't even withstand a single blow from the violent energy of heaven and earth. Almost in the next second, the barrier was instantly destroyed. Nie Hongjie's qi and blood surged. He couldn't go on like this. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Mao Zhen and Yi Zhao, who were not too far away. "Clan leader Mao Zhen. Clan leader Yi Zhao. I beg you to help. As long as the two of you are willing to help, the celestial sect will definitely reward you handsomely." Now, among the people who were still here, the 2 of them were the strongest. They were the only ones who had the ability to save their own lives and help others get out of danger. Hence, Nie Hongjie spoke without hesitation. Mao Zhen turned around to look at them, seemingly smiling. "I already gave you time to run just now. You didn't run and missed the opportunity. Who can you blame?" Nie Hongjie's face turned pale. Previously, Sun Yi had personally advised Shiru and the rest to leave and said that this place was extremely dangerous. But at that time, he thought that Sun Yi was just trying to send the rest away so that Rong Xiu and Chu Liwei could take all the treasures here for themselves. Who knew that he was actually telling the truth? Now, apart from Sun Yi and the rest, almost all of the people who were still here were not on good terms with Chu Liu's side. After the palace collapsed, almost half of the people here had died in a short period of time. If Mao Zhen and the rest did not help, Nie Hongjie was sure that he would have died before he could run back to the stone door. "I was confused just now. But this is a matter of life and death. Clan leaders." Mao Zhen snorted and stepped out of the stone door. Sun Yi and Chang Wanzhou followed closely behind. When Nie Hongjie saw the 2 of them, he was shocked. How could they be so fast? Sun Yi was one thing. He looked like a powerful one and was probably a god. But the young man with short blonde hair looked to be about 17 or 18 years old and was only a high god. How could he be so much faster than the others? His speed was not any slower than a high god's. But this thought only flashed through his mind quickly. He did not have time to think about it carefully. Just as he was filled with despair, he suddenly saw someone in front of him. He focused his eyes and was overjoyed. Clan leader Yi Zhao. Standing in front of him was Yi Zhao. He had been moving with Mao Zhen, but when they reached the stone door, he came back. Looking at Yi Zhao in front of him, Nie Hongjie was very excited. Clan leader Yi Zhao. Are you here to save us? Ai and Ruyun are really grateful. Rumor had it that clan leader Yi Zhao was arrogant and strict. He also hated interacting with humans. Nie Hongjie never expected that Yi Zhao would come to help at a time like this. Yi Zhao looked at him coldly. No. That cold word caused Nie Hongjie's smile to freeze on his face. What do you mean by that? Seeing Yi Zhao's expression, a sense of uneasiness gradually surged in his heart. Yi Zhao raised his gaze slightly and looked at the collapsing hall behind the two of them. He enunciated each word clearly. I'm here to send you on your way. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his hand. Before Nie Hongjie could say anything, he felt a strong force hit his chest. His body flew backward in an instant, and Nie Ruyun, who had lost his support, was also sent flying. In the blink of an eye, the two figures were swept away by the terrifying surging energy. A few streaks of blood fell, but they had completely disappeared. Even a high god would die without a burial place after entering that place. Of course, Yi Zhao had used all his strength when he attacked, so Nie Hongjie might have died at his hands. As for Nie Ruyun, needless to say, he was completely dead. After confirming that the two of them were completely dead, Yi Zhao withdrew his gaze and turned to leave. Mao Zhen, who was standing outside the stone door, clicked his tongue when he saw this. It's been so many years, but this old man is still so vengeful. But Nie Hongjie and his daughter were courting death. Of all the people to provoke, why did they have to provoke Dumpling? He pursed his lips. That was Yi Zhao's precious darling. Yi Zhao was already distressed that Dumpling had been tortured like that, but Nie Hongjie dared to slander Dumpling in public? Were they tired of living? Wonderful book house, you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.